To keep seeing more stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you like this video, share your feedback in the comments section. The Emerald Dress. Violet Chen had perfected the art of being invisible. For 8 months, she had worked at the Sinclair estate, moving through its grand halls like a shadow. Her uniform was always crisp, her hair pulled back in a simple bun, her eyes respectfully lowered when Lorenzo Sinclair passed by. She cleaned the library where he worked late into the night, prepared the dining room before his morning coffee, and disappeared into the staff quarters when his business associates arrived. The mansion itself was breathtaking. 20 rooms spread across 3 floors, each decorated with artwork that cost more than Violet would earn in a lifetime. Crystal chandeliers hung from painted ceilings, and Persian rugs covered marble floors that reflected the golden afternoon light. Gardens stretched beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, maintained by a team of groundskeepers who worked as quietly as Violet did. Lorenzo Sinclair was the kind of man people whispered about. At 32, he had built an empire from nothing, transforming a small investment firm into one of the most powerful financial institutions in the country. The other staff members spoke of his brilliance, his demanding standards, his ability to see through any deception. They also spoke of his solitude. No family visited, no romantic interests appeared at his door. He lived alone in this palace of marble and gold, surrounded by employees who served him but never truly knew him. Violet had her own reasons for accepting this position. Her younger brother, Thomas, needed surgery that their family could never afford. The medical bills had piled up like mountains of impossible debt. When the employment agency offered her this job with a salary triple what she had earned before, she had signed the contract without reading the fine print. She would have agreed to anything to save her brother. The work was demanding but fair. Lorenzo never spoke harshly to his staff, though his expectations were crystal clear. Everything had to be perfect, from the temperature of his coffee to the angle of the books on his desk. Violet learned quickly, adapted faster, and soon became one of the most trusted members of the household staff. She never expected him to notice her at all. The evening began like any other Friday. Violet had requested the night off 2 weeks earlier, carefully scheduling around the household routine. Her best friend from childhood, Ruby, was getting married, and Violet had promised to attend the reception. She had nothing appropriate to wear until she remembered the dress packed away in her small room at the staff quarters. The emerald dress had belonged to her mother. Silk that caught the light like water, with delicate beading along the neckline and a cut that was both elegant and modest. Her mother had worn it to her own wedding anniversary dinner, years before illness had taken her. Violet had kept it wrapped in tissue paper, a precious memory she could not bear to sell even when money was desperately tight. She dressed carefully that evening, her hands trembling slightly as she fastened the zipper. The mirror in her small room showed her a stranger. Without her uniform, without her carefully maintained invisibility, she looked different. The dress brought out the warmth in her skin, made her dark eyes seem larger, transformed her from a servant into someone who belonged at elegant parties and sophisticated gatherings. Violet grabbed her small purse and headed toward the service entrance. She had timed her departure perfectly. Lorenzo was in his study with his financial advisor, a meeting that typically lasted 2 hours. She would slip out unseen, attend the reception, and return before midnight when her shift would normally end. But as she reached the grand foyer, taking a shortcut she had never used before, his voice stopped her cold. "Where are you going like that?" The words were quiet but carried across the marble space like thunder. Violet's hand froze on the doorknob. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she turned slowly, carefully, to face him. Lorenzo Sinclair stood at the top of the grand staircase. He had removed his suit jacket, and his white shirt was open at the collar. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it while working. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. Dark, intense, and focused entirely on her with an expression she had never seen before. Surprise. Curiosity. Something else she could not identify. "I have the evening off, Mr. Sinclair," Violet managed, her voice steadier than she felt. You approved my request 2 weeks ago. He descended the stairs with measured steps, each footfall echoing in the quiet space. The crystal chandelier above cast shadows across his face, making him look both younger and more dangerous than usual. I remember approving your evening off, he said, stopping 3 steps above her. The position forced her to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. I do not remember you looking like that. Heat rushed to Violet's cheeks. She wanted to explain about the wedding, about her mother's dress, about how she was still the same invisible maid he had always employed. But the words tangled in her throat under his unwavering gaze. Is something wrong? She asked instead, her fingers tightening on her purse. Lorenzo continued down the remaining steps until he stood directly in front of her. This close, she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw, the way his gaze moved from her face to the dress and back again. You have worked here for 8 months, he said slowly, as if working through a puzzle. 8 months, and I never noticed. Noticed what, sir? His expression shifted, something almost vulnerable crossing his features before his usual composed mask returned. That you were hiding. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning Violet could not quite grasp. She had been hiding, of course. Hiding her worries about her brother, her exhaustion from working double shifts, her loneliness in this beautiful mansion where she belonged to neither the world upstairs nor the world outside. But how had he known? Hidden hearts. The wedding reception had been beautiful, but Violet could barely remember it. She had smiled at the right moments, congratulated Ruby with genuine warmth, and danced when pulled onto the floor by enthusiastic guests. But her mind remained trapped in that moment at the bottom of the staircase, replaying Lorenzo Sinclair's words over and over. That you were hiding. She returned to the mansion just before midnight, slipping through the service entrance as quietly as she had left. The kitchen was dark and empty, the rest of the staff long since retired to their quarters. Violet kicked off her shoes and carried them in one hand, the emerald dress whispering against her legs as she climbed the back stairs to her room. A light was on in the study. She could see the golden glow beneath the door as she passed through the hallway. Lorenzo was still awake, still working, as he so often was. Violet wondered if he ever truly rested, or if the weight of his empire kept him perpetually alert, perpetually alone. She should have kept walking. Should have gone to her room, changed into her nightclothes, and forgotten the strange moment they had shared. But something made her pause outside the study door, her hand raised as if to knock, her breath caught in her throat. The door opened before she could decide. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, still in his white shirt and dark trousers, looking as if he had been expecting her. His eyes traveled over her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, seen in a way she had carefully avoided for months. Did you enjoy your evening? He asked quietly. Yes, sir. Thank you for allowing me the time off. Stop calling me sir when we are alone. The request startled her. In 8 months, he had never suggested anything beyond the formal relationship between employer and employee. Violet shifted her weight, uncertain how to respond. I do not know what else to call you, Mr. Sinclair. My name is Lorenzo. He stepped back, gesturing into the study. Would you come in for a moment? There is something I need to discuss with you. Every instinct told Violet this was dangerous territory. Employees did not enter their employer's private study at midnight. They did not have conversations in dimly lit rooms while wearing evening gowns. But something in his expression, a loneliness that mirrored her own, made her nod and step across the threshold. The study was exactly as she had left it that morning. Books lined the walls, their leather spines arranged by color and size. A massive desk dominated one corner, covered in documents and a laptop that glowed with spreadsheets. But Lorenzo did not move toward the desk. Instead, he walked to the windows that overlooked the garden, his hands clasped behind his back. 8 months ago, I hired you without an interview, he said, his voice quiet. The agency sent your file, and I approved it immediately. Do you know why? Violet shook her head, though he could not see the gesture with his back turned. Because the agency director told me you were desperate. She said you needed money for a family emergency and would work harder than anyone else because of it. He turned to face her, and the look in his eyes was almost apologetic. I have built my success on finding people who are motivated, who have something to prove. I thought you would be perfect for the position. I have tried to do good work, Violet said carefully. You have done exceptional work. You are efficient, discreet, and more observant than you realize. Lorenzo moved closer, and Violet fought the urge to step back. But tonight, when I saw you at that door, I realized I have been as blind as I accuse others of being. I do not understand. You wear a uniform like armor. You keep your hair back, your eyes down, your voice soft. You have made yourself invisible because you believe that is what I want. He stopped just an arm's length away. But tonight, in that dress, I saw who you really are beneath all that careful hiding. And I realized I have wasted 8 months not seeing you at all. Violet's heart was racing now, her palms damp despite the cool air from the open window. You hired me to clean your home and manage your household. That is what I have done. Yes. And I have paid you well for it. Lorenzo's expression softened in a way she had never witnessed. But I think we have both been hiding, Violet. I think we have both built walls so high that we forgot what it feels like to let someone see the truth. The use of her name, spoken in his deep voice without the formal distance of her title, sent warmth through her chest. She had heard him say it before when speaking to the head of staff, but never like this. Never with such careful attention to each syllable. What truth are you talking about? She whispered. Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment, his gaze searching her face as if looking for permission to continue. When he spoke again, his voice carried a vulnerability that transformed him from the untouchable businessman into someone achingly human. I am not the man people believe me to be. I did not build this empire through brilliance alone. I built it through fear, through isolation, through convincing myself that needing anyone was a weakness I could not afford. He ran a hand through his hair, disheveling it further. My parents died when I was 17. A car accident that left me with nothing but debt and a younger sister to raise. I worked 3 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, and clawed my way up from poverty by being harder, smarter, and more ruthless than everyone around me. Violet listened in stunned silence. She had known nothing of his past, nothing of the journey that had brought him to this mansion of marble and gold. By the time I was 30, I had everything I thought I wanted. Money, power, respect. But I had no one to share it with. My sister married and moved across the country. My friends had long since given up trying to reach me through the walls I had built. I convinced myself that solitude was strength, that needing companionship was a distraction I could not afford. He moved to the window again, staring out at the darkened garden. And then you arrived. Quiet, efficient Violet Chen, who never asked for anything beyond her salary. Who worked harder than anyone else and disappeared the moment the work was done. I thought you were the perfect employee because you demanded nothing from me emotionally. But tonight, he continued, turning back to face her, when I saw you in that dress, looking beautiful and nervous and so completely different from the invisible maid I had convinced myself you were, I realized something that terrified me. Violet's breath caught. What did you realize? That I have been noticing you all along. The way you hum softly when you think no one can hear. The way you arrange flowers in the vases with such care, even though you know I will barely glance at them. The way you leave my coffee exactly as I like it, not because I have told you how, but because you have paid attention to every detail of my preferences. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I have been noticing you, and I have been fighting against it because I did not want to need anyone again. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that made Violet's head spin. She had spent 8 months being invisible, and now he was telling her he had seen her the entire time. I do not know what you want me to say, she managed. I want you to tell me the truth. Why did you really take this job? What family emergency brought you here? Violet hesitated, her instinct to protect her privacy warring with an unexpected desire to trust him. But there was something in his eyes, a genuine concern that reached past her defenses. My brother, she said quietly. Thomas is 16. He has a heart condition that requires surgery. The cost is more than my family could ever afford. I took this job because the salary would cover the medical bills and give Thomas a chance at a normal life. Lorenzo's expression shifted, understanding and something like pain crossing his features. You have been working double shifts. I have seen the household logs. You cover for other staff members, you take on extra tasks, you never refuse when asked to do more. The more I work, the faster I can save enough money. And what about you? He asked gently. What about your life, your dreams, your future beyond these walls? The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in so long. She had become so focused on saving Thomas that she had forgotten to consider what came after. I have not thought that far ahead, she admitted. Lorenzo crossed the distance between them in 2 strides. He did not touch her, but his presence was overwhelming, filling her senses with the scent of his cologne and the warmth of his proximity. Then let me ask you something else. If money were not an issue, if your brother's surgery were taken care of tomorrow, would you stay here? Would you continue working in this house, being invisible, hiding who you really are? Violet looked up at him, seeing the hope and fear warring in his dark eyes. The truth was complicated, tangled up in feelings she had been suppressing for months. She had noticed him too. Had found herself listening for his footsteps in the hallway, had memorized the sound of his voice, had felt an undeniable pull toward this lonely man who lived in a palace but seemed to have nothing of true value. I do not know, she whispered honestly. Until tonight, I thought you barely knew I existed. I know you exist, Violet. I have known it every single day since you arrived. He lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to step away, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. And tonight, I am done pretending otherwise. Love without BUNDRES. The morning after their midnight conversation, Violet woke to find an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a check with an amount that made her hands tremble. It was enough to cover Thomas's surgery completely, with money left over for his recovery and rehabilitation. A note accompanied the check, written in Lorenzo's precise handwriting. This is not charity. Consider it an advance on your continued employment, if you choose to stay. The choice is entirely yours. L.S. Violet sat on the edge of her bed, the check clutched in her fingers, tears streaming down her face. In one gesture, Lorenzo had removed the burden that had weighed on her for 2 years. Her brother would have his surgery. He would have his chance at a normal life. And she was free to make a choice she had never thought possible. She could leave. Take the money, thank Lorenzo politely, and walk away from the Sinclair estate to build a life of her own choosing. Or she could stay, not because she needed the salary anymore, but because of the connection that had sparked between them in the study last night. The decision should have been simple. But as Violet dressed in her uniform and prepared to start her day, she realized nothing about this situation was simple at all. She found Lorenzo in the breakfast room, reading the morning newspaper with his usual cup of black coffee. He looked up when she entered, his expression carefully neutral, though she could see the tension in his shoulders. Good morning, he said quietly. Good morning. Violet set down the tray she had prepared, her movements precise despite her shaking hands. I received your envelope. I hope it helps your brother. It will save his life. She paused, gathering her courage. But I need to understand something. Why did you do this? Lorenzo set down his newspaper, giving her his full attention. Because I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, and your brother deserves a chance to live. It is that simple. Nothing about this feels simple. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You are right. Nothing about this is simple. He gestured to the chair across from him. Will you sit? Please. Not as my employee, but as someone I would like to know better. Violet hesitated only a moment before sitting down. The morning light streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the breakfast room in shades of gold. Outside, gardeners were already at work, their movements visible through the glass. I have been thinking about what you said last night, Lorenzo began. About hiding, about building walls, about forgetting what it means to let someone see the truth. I want to tell you something I have never told anyone else. Violet waited, her heart beating faster. When my parents died, I made a promise to myself. I promised that I would never be vulnerable again, never allow myself to need anyone so completely that losing them would destroy me. His voice was steady, but she could hear the emotion beneath it. I have kept that promise for 15 years. I have built a fortune, earned respect, created an empire. But I have been completely alone the entire time. You have your sister, Violet offered gently. Julia and I speak twice a year. She has her own family now, her own life. I have made sure she is financially secure, but emotionally, we are strangers. Lorenzo leaned forward, his gaze intense. I have employees who are loyal, business partners who are reliable, associates who are useful. But I have no one who truly knows me. No one I can trust with the parts of myself that are not strong or successful or perfectly controlled. Why are you telling me this? Because last night, when you stood in that doorway wearing your mother's dress, looking nervous and beautiful and so very real, something inside me broke open. All the walls I have carefully built, all the distance I have maintained, suddenly felt like a prison instead of protection. He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his skin. I want to know you, Violet. Not as my employee, not as someone who works in my home, but as a person. I want to understand what makes you hum when you arrange flowers, what you dream about when you think no one is watching, what brings you joy beyond just surviving. Violet felt tears prick her eyes again. No one had ever asked to know her like this. Her life had been about service, about sacrifice, about making herself small enough to fit into whatever space was available. I am afraid, she admitted quietly. Of what? Of this. Of you. Of feeling something that could disappear as quickly as it appeared. She finally met his gaze directly. You are Lorenzo Sinclair. You live in a world of power and wealth and influence. I am a maid who wears a uniform and cleans your floors. Even without that dynamic, we come from completely different places. Money does not make me better than you, Violet. It just makes me lonelier. Lorenzo's expression was raw with honesty. You have a brother you love enough to sacrifice everything for. You have friends who invite you to their weddings. You have connections to people and a capacity for love that I have spent 15 years trying to convince myself I did not need. If anything, you are richer than I could ever be. The words hit her like a physical force. She had never considered her life as anything but struggle, but he was right. Despite everything, she had love. She had Thomas, who called her every week to tell her about school. She had Ruby, who had been her friend since childhood. She had a capacity for connection that money could never buy. What are you suggesting? Violet asked carefully. I am suggesting that we stop hiding. Both of us. Lorenzo finally closed the distance, his hand covering hers on the table. His touch was warm, gentle, completely at odds with the powerful businessmen the world saw. I am suggesting that we take time to know each other as people, without the barrier of employer and employee. I am suggesting that we see where this connection might lead if we are both brave enough to follow it. People will talk. Your business associates, the other staff members, everyone who knows you. Let them talk. I have spent 15 years caring what people think, building a reputation, maintaining an image. I am tired of performing for an audience that does not care about anything beyond what I can do for them. His thumb traced circles on her wrist, a gesture so intimate it made her breath catch. I would rather have one real connection with someone who sees me than 1,000 superficial relationships with people who only see my bank account. Violet looked at their joined hands, his tanned skin against her paler fingers. Everything about this was risky, uncertain, potentially disastrous. But beneath the fear was something else. Hope. Possibility. The chance for something she had never allowed herself to want. I do not know how to do this, she confessed. I have never been in a relationship where I was not trying to be useful or necessary or valuable in some practical way. Then we will learn together. Lorenzo smiled, and it transformed his entire face. I have no idea how to do this either. I have not dated anyone in 5 years, and even then, it was more of an arrangement than a real relationship. We can figure it out as we go. What about my job? You can continue working here if you wish, though not in the same capacity. I will hire someone else to manage the household duties. But I would like you to stay, not as an employee, but as someone who lives here because you want to. No obligations, no expectations beyond spending time together and seeing where this leads. It was too much, too fast, too overwhelming. But as Violet looked into Lorenzo's eyes, she saw the same fear and hope she felt reflected back at her. He was taking a risk too, opening himself to the possibility of being hurt, choosing vulnerability over the safety of isolation. My brother's surgery is scheduled for next month, she said slowly. I need to be there for him, to help him through recovery. Of course. I will arrange everything. The best surgeons, a private recovery room, whatever he needs. Lorenzo squeezed her hand gently. And if you need to stay with him during recovery, I understand completely. You would do that? Even though we barely know each other? I would do it because helping your brother matters to you, and you matter to me. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. Violet, I am not asking you to trust me completely right now. I am asking you to give us a chance. To stay here, to spend time with me, to see if this connection we both feel is worth exploring. Violet stood close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, to feel the warmth radiating from his body, to notice the slight vulnerability in his expression despite his confident words. This man, who commanded boardrooms and built empires, was nervous about whether she would say yes. One condition, she said finally. Anything. You have to stop trying to fix everything with money. If we do this, if we try to build something real, it has to be based on more than financial security or grand gestures. It has to be about actually knowing each other. Lorenzo's smile widened. Agreed. Though I should warn you, I am very bad at doing things halfway. When I commit to something, I commit completely. That does not sound like a warning. That sounds like a promise. It is both. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent electricity through her entire body. So what do you say, Violet Chen? Will you give us a chance? She thought about her mother's emerald dress, the one that had started all of this. Her mother had been a romantic, believing in love even when life was difficult. She had told Violet once that the bravest thing a person could do was open their heart to another, knowing it might break but hoping it would soar instead. Yes, Violet whispered. I will give us a chance. Lorenzo pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in 8 months, Violet allowed herself to stop being invisible. She let herself be seen, held, valued for something beyond her usefulness. And in that moment, wrapped in the embrace of a man who had spent 15 years building walls only to tear them down for her, she understood what her mother had meant. Love was not about safety or certainty or practical arrangements. It was about choosing to be brave enough to let someone see your truth, and trusting they would cherish it rather than use it against you. 3 months later, Thomas had his surgery successfully. He recovered in a private room at the best cardiac hospital in the country, with Violet by his side every day and Lorenzo visiting whenever his schedule allowed. The two men bonded over card games and bad hospital food, and Thomas teased his sister mercilessly about finally finding someone who made her smile the way she deserved. 6 months after that, Violet moved her belongings from the staff quarters to the master wing, not as an employee but as Lorenzo's partner in every sense of the word. They learned each other's rhythms, their quirks, their dreams. She taught him to appreciate small moments of joy. He taught her that accepting help was not weakness but trust. A year to the day after she had worn her mother's emerald dress and stopped Lorenzo at the bottom of the staircase, he asked her to marry him in the same spot. Not with a grand gesture or an expensive production, but with a simple question and a ring that had belonged to his own mother, saved all these years for someone he could love with his whole heart. Violet said yes without hesitation. Their wedding was small, attended by Thomas, Julia and her family, Ruby, and a handful of people who had supported them both. Violet wore her mother's emerald dress again, and Lorenzo cried when he saw her walking down the aisle, no longer hiding, no longer invisible, but radiant with the confidence of being truly loved. They built a life together that balanced his world of business with her love of simple pleasures. He scaled back his work hours, trusting others to manage parts of his empire so he could spend time with his wife. She pursued her passion for floral design, opening a small shop that became known for its artistic arrangements and warm atmosphere. And every evening, they would stand together in the grand foyer where their story had truly begun, holding hands beneath the crystal chandelier, grateful that they had both been brave enough to stop hiding and start living. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing a person can do is allow themselves to be seen. And sometimes, the person who sees you is exactly who you have been waiting for all along.